2 weeks later, we were sent to camp.
It was 1942 when young Esther Toshiko Hirabayashi, along with her family and over 120,000 other Japanese Americans along the West Coast, were sent to desolate internment camps throughout the United States. They were told to only pack what they could carry and were only given a few weeks to do so. This mass relocation was implemented by Executive Order 9066, which was signed by President Franklin D. Roosevelt in response to the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor. It allowed the United States military to evacuate, quote, any and all persons from designated areas. Though they used grounds of suspected espionage and sabotage to justify their actions, no evidence of Japanese American disloyalty was ever found.
Determined that all Japanese within the coastal area should move inland.
I just went along with it because everybody was going, you know. We were born in the country. It was rural, and the community was called Thomas, but it had no stores or anything. It's just a grade school, and and we were very poor.
The Hirabayashis operated a farm in Thomas, Washington, to make a living during the Depression. The parents, Shungo and Mitsuko Hirabayashi, had come from Japan in the early 1900s, along with countless other Japanese immigrants. They had 5 children, 4 boys and 1 girl, who attended the local schools. At the time of the internment, their oldest son, Gordon, was away studying at the University of Washington. When President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, in a single moment, the Hirabayashis went from being an ordinary American family to being viewed as enemies. Even the children born in the U.S., citizens, were being incarcerated in their own country, the only home they had ever known. Esther's oldest brother, Gordon, knew deep down that this was a fundamental violation of his constitutional rights. He defied the orders of the government and turned himself in to the FBI. He was one of only 3 people who courageously stood up to the government.
They asked him if he would sign, you know, to go to camp, and he says no, it's against my principles.
His case, Hirabayashi versus the United States, went all the way up to the Supreme Court, but he lost and served time in prison. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of the United States, claiming that it was a matter of, quote, military necessity. Meanwhile, Esther, who was 13 years old at the time, did not fully grasp the reasons for his actions. She kept busy in camp, participating in various activities.
I played softball, so we were all part of a team, and then they had a little library that somebody donated some books. They donated a whole section of Nancy Drew mysteries, so I went through that whole series. My mother found the only piano in the establishment in Pinedale. I was kept busy, and I didn't have time to think about heady thoughts about what Gordon was doing or anything like that. My mother especially worried about him, but because they didn't know whether he was, going to stay in jail forever or whatever.
Many years later, in 1987, his case was appealed, and Gordon Hirabayashi finally got the victory that he deserved. Esther attended his hearings.
I sat in on the trial, and I was quite interested in what transpired, because by then I was older, knew what was going on. Well, I was quite proud of what he, stood up for.
In 2012, after his death, Gordon Hirabayashi was awarded with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest honor a civilian can receive. Esther, along with other family members, went to Washington, D.C. to accept the award from President Obama.
He gave a talk on each one, and he presented the medal.
The next year, Gordon's book, A Principled Stand, was published with the help of his son and nephew. When reading it, Esther saw a whole new side of her brother.
Uh, when I read his book, I found another Gordon, you know, with all these heavy thoughts and he had communication with all these big important people that I didn't know he knew, and so it was a revelation, you know, because he was just a older brother who did little things.
Before awarding him with the medal, Obama spoke extensively about Gordon Hirabayashi at the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies annual event.
In the midst of World War II, when the son of Japanese immigrants, Gordon Hirabayashi, ignored the curfews and refused transfer to an internment camp, when he was jailed for his defiance, when he later appealed his conviction and took his case all the way to the Supreme Court, he understood that he was fighting for something larger than himself. And he once said, "I never look at my case just as a Japanese-American case. It's an American case with principles that affect the fundamental human rights of all Americans."
As the president shows, Gordon Hirabayashi was a hero. He stood up to what he believed was wrong, and not for his own benefit, but for the greater good of his country. However, he was also just an ordinary human being like the rest of us. He was a son, and a husband, and a father, and a student. To Esther, he was just an older brother. He shows us that each of us is capable of making a difference, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. The Presidential Medal was a step in the right direction. It shows we are walking on the path to justice, but we are by no means at the destination. We still face huge problems, and they will only be solved if regular, everyday people decide to do something great.